Evening, everyone. Welcome to a slightly delayed Kame House session with the 2MK team. Today, having gotten our fill of the new information in Monster Hunter World, we are back to Dragon Ball FighterZ. As always, this is a neither stays on US East Coast 2 lobby. You can find us in front of Kame House in Circle Match Priority Lobby 02. We're going back to our slightly more advanced discussion of the fact that Broly as a character somewhat shifts the BD mashup mnemonic that we were using as he is able to command grab. But it's not just the fact that he can command grab that causes this, rather the fact that as a character, he has no reason not to. Many command grab characters are trying to get you to block in order to set it up, with a real focus on using that grab as a way to condition you. Broly, on the other hand, mostly grabs because he feels like it. But beyond that, we're still looking at the same block, deflect, meter, assist, parking, up back, player. The S can also be Super Dash in certain matchups where you're on the offensive, but mostly when you're starting out, you don't necessarily have enough of that. And the mnemonic is best meant to help you understand how to use strategy rather than specific attacks, even though we do have bots entirely for the purpose of learning how to learn Super Dash. Part of the reason why deflect must be worked into your game at least a little bit is because, as the designers made clear from the very beginning, a lot of moves in this game are either safe or really not the sort of thing you're going to be suffering a lot for doing. If you can space most of them correctly, you're not in much danger. Your opponent has to make a read or a call out a lot of the time. And deflect is simply among the best for this. It's not necessarily a tool meant to be used terribly often in neutral, though it is extremely effective when used correctly. But it's more so about understanding where your opponent is in their strings and using that knowledge to get them away from you. As with most fighting games, there's no specific way to know what's going to happen in the mix-up. The opponent usually has some option, be it risky or, in some cases, outright silly, that will beat your intelligent reaction. But part of this is another strategic aspect of games. You aim to get your opponent to think that this is necessary by holding on to your health and deflecting or similar. One of your goals therefore being to make sure that the thing your opponent has to do to beat your main option is either the slowest or the craziest thing possible. Because if you can get them into that mental state and they do it twice, all you really had to do was survive long enough to get them to make that error and finish them off. It can of course be super hard to do this, especially with the number of assist style pressures that you have to deal with. But this is why generally B, i.e. blocking, is the first part of it. Broly is interestingly not this sort of character because if Broly does go for the command grab while he is pressuring you with his assists, he doesn't always connect. Depending on the assist, you therefore take a little bit of damage and don't end up having to worry about much. Meaning that Broly is more likely to try to stick to you than anything else. This makes your deflects a little bit stronger than blocking, depending on where you are in the string. There are a few other characters who have similar situations come up. Where you know that for whatever reason, they're just not dangerous enough to justify not just deflecting them. This is of course something you see less in practice when playing evasive characters like Frieza, as Frieza just doesn't end up blocking that often. But that makes his deflect even more important, as he's just not able to get opponents off him as easily as some other characters once they actually get there. Our stream tonight is going to be shorter, partially due to the logistical hiccups that came from watching the Monster Hunter stream and our expectations relative to it in terms of duration. So we will probably still only be going until about 9:15 Eastern tonight. Giving us another 75 minutes or so of stream. That said, you're likely to see all of the usual suspects, and of course you can feel free to join us. The passcode for this lounge is 2717, as it always is. You can find that on our Twitter, 2_MK_FGC. If you've ever happened to forget it, and it is often in the stream title along with any other information you need. BD mashup is a lot more important when fighting most of the opponents you could face online, as they're much more likely to use certain methods of extending their combos and pressure as long as possible. It is among the... I'd say it's the second order strategy for this game. The first order strategy is, of course, as everyone knows, Super Dash a lot. But once you've been defeated in that, or learned to do it well enough that it's not as obviously predictable that you keep on getting beat up, but also therefore doing it less often, the next option is to find a team with one character who has a really long combo if you have certain assists. We saw a little of this last week, and our guest at the time even specifically pointed out that what they were trying to do really only worked with the Tian Shinhan assist. There are quite a few things that are like this. Exactly which assist out of the combo extender type you need might depend on your own team, but it definitely comes up more often than not in mid and lower level play, as that's a reasonable way to try to win in a fighting game. Making sure, therefore, that you know how to defend your way out of certain things is really important. Once you're already hit, there's very little you can do most of the time, but that type of assist is also really easy to use to set up bad situations and confusions. And deflecting is at least a decent method of trying to get through this because of precisely the property you're facing. Deflects are usually beaten by slightly delayed attacks. But the entire reason why those are helpful is that they're trying to get rid of your potential to fight back at all. They leave what appears to be a gap and then try to take advantage of the fact that you think there's one and hit something. Depending on the assist, it means that even if you did hit one character, you will get hit by the other. Deflect normally resolves at least part of this for you, especially since Deflect has a long duration and can be somewhat mashed to resolve the situation. We do not necessarily suggest, however, using the deflect on your wake up. This is because the execution requirement is higher, especially against characters who have good quick lows. Well, let's move through the basic parts of such a fight. You see Piccolo unable to continue the neutral from this position. But it ceases to make too much difference after a bit. As we've noted before, Broly's strength is often that he doesn't really have to stop attacking. This makes it a little bit easier for players who don't specifically understand a lot about offense to get it going. You can see it there. The opponent basically just kept on attacking, meaning that had one deflected, it would have been more effective. So let's try this from the other side now. Now, bear in mind that my opponent is the sort of person who, once they know, either through stream or something else, that I'm going to increase defense, they'll start doing more dragon rushes. But, in this case, this doesn't really affect the plan too much. Because once again, this changes their mental state toward a particular type of positioning. And from there, it's just a matter of understanding their perspectives.
The battle's about to start! Good luck! Are you ready? Go!
But the main reason for taking the block deflect approach as your start is to learn as much as you can about your opponent's block strengths and when they autopilot them. So you do have to have at least the presence of mind to play normally and push them. You can't just put yourself into a mental state where you are trying to do this because you think it will work. Part of the requirement of it working is that you manage to push your opponent to the state where they're at least slightly autopiloting their attack string. But there are also situations in which one autopilots one's defense. And the things that come out of that often have a much bigger effect on how the neutral of the game plays out. One good option you're already seeing here is the tendency of Just Fine, for example, to take certain big risks when Omni Rabbit has a lot of meter, or certain setups with Adult Gohan. The purpose of this isn't really to get a win, but rather to take a lot of damage in certain control situations. Since one of the strongest ways Omni Rabbit deals with pressure situations is the meter aspect of our mnemonic, knowing exactly when to push him into flinching and using with level 3, especially early on in the match, can cause both wastage of this attack, and even if it hits, sometimes still turn out good for the opponent. One of the more important aspects of this understanding of your opponent's rhythm, whether it be mashy or conservative, is having the presence of mind from your side to manipulate it with confidence and not simply wait for them to make a mistake. You can't necessarily assume my opponent does this a lot, so they'll eventually do it if I do nothing. You sometimes need to verify that the trigger for them doing the thing is actually you doing nothing, as there's no specific reason to believe this for most moves and attacks in the game. In fact, it's very important to learn how your opponent behaves when they're forced to block for long periods, how they behave when they're forced to play neutral for long periods, and how they behave under pressure where they feel as if they might have a problem. You also don't want to make your own self too predictable when it comes to these things, hence the mnemonic, to remind you of your options if you find you keep on getting caught for using a particular one. We will call this team life cycle of a Saiyan. But do bear in mind that this is technically not Kid Goku in the kid sense, but rather GT Goku, i.e. he's still actually an old man in there. But at least he's tiny and therefore probably hard to hit. If you're not familiar with this character, he's mostly a mobility trickster. You could consider him a zoner, but it depends on what games you have come from. If you come from the standard Street Fighter life, then you could mostly think of him as Dalsim. He still has all of the same styles of speed, movement, and rushdown. But as you can see, he can effectively teleport by moving himself around using his Kamehameha. He also has an assist useful for one of the things that didn't really have as many great methods for doing it before. Extending a combo from the ground with your assist while still chasing down up-back escape. Not a lot of characters had an assist that covered this space. The ones that did often had to get into the air themselves and took longer to appear. Though you could, by the same reasoning, assume that, hey, this is a matter of the attack spacing. But this one is more reliable in that the distance and therefore the juggle isn't going to be as directly related. This is not to say that he has a great keep-out game per se, but he can use a lot of his options in very similar ways without having to worry too much, and then just gets additional mobility options for it. So honestly, a fairly standard character in that regard. Broly is actually a strong counter to the kid, therefore, simply because he has the barrier and can do these things.
Get ready for battle!
So if you've ever thought to yourself, I like zoning, but I like zoning and teleporting at the same time, this is probably the character for you.
Ready?
Other things we've discussed before have to do with understanding an opponent who has a hole in their game, such as no offense, and being able to use this to manipulate them in one way or another. Forcing them to use meter or take more risks in order to achieve the same thing that other characters would normally just do can become very important for you. For example, in this case, you making Krillin use up the Trunks assist, so it's no longer available to him, and he has to face Frieza. Once it's back, you once again change your mental perspective on the match. Force Krillin to use it to get in some way, and lessen the way he can extend his combos. But there's another layer to this. When the player sees their attempt fail, their psychological state changes. Case in point. This is what you hear in the fighting game community as being on tilt. Being on tilt has nothing to do with being mad, although some people are made angry, and this seems to contribute to it. They're usually just happening at the same time. There are a few people who are just angry all the time and therefore are never on tilt when they're angry. Their on tilt state is actually closer to feeling as if they need to calm down because the things they're doing aren't working. In other words, they get discouraged. Often when you play characters who have very good offense and mix-ups, being discouraged at your opponent managing to get out of a few of them is actually not what you want to feel. If you just find yourself feeling angry that they did it, then you might be better off rolling with that. The key is to make sure that that does not go so far as to affect your judgment in terms of what thing to do next. A change in the way you would use your resources that happens as a result of not in any way a logical calculation or even a proper guess, but simply feeling like your opponent shouldn't be able to do something. Being on tilt is often related to entitlement, but doesn't even have to be. Just Fine, for example, tends to have a very confident defensive style. And doesn't really get either... Being mad doesn't tend to make her play worse. And it certainly doesn't usually make her defense worse. However, the feeling that one's defense is failing in some way for a reason that she cannot understand can sometimes happen at the same time as this and therefore put her on tilt. If she understands your character well, you winning a few mix-ups can be frustrating, and she may even express that frustration, but it often doesn't really affect whether or not she takes certain actions with her meter, options, or even the same defense that has been failing. She'll usually just keep on defending at more or less the same level, and whether or not she gets defeated has more to do with the way the mix-up is working, or the stubbornness of the opponent relative to her understanding of their stubbornness. It's very important to be able to tell these two things apart, because thinking you are on tilt when you're not is a quick way to end up on tilt. Another thing that can often cause this for players, however, is facing an opponent who has very high requirements executionally to defeat. For whatever reason, there are multiple reasons why this could be true. Or just dropping execution on something that puts you in danger in some form, regardless of whether or not it was necessarily something you should be expected to be able to do every time. Sometimes the fact that you have already accepted, I can't do this combo 100%, is only going to matter if you don't die as a result of it, for example. For some people, losing as a result of dropping a combo, in one way or another, is a really big deal, even if they already felt, oh, I can't do that combo all the time anyway. But mostly, you see the same sort of behavior in this case. Vegeta mostly being able to do things at the clear pace that he usually does, and wear down the opponent in terms of how much they've got. If we contrast this to the Wolf style of play, which is basically mostly hitting buttons, the problem becomes the executional difficulty of preventing this from happening, and on top of that, the awareness difficulty of recognizing whether or not you're in range for a button to be a good idea for your opponent. This might not even matter, as very buttons the opponents will often hit the button whether or not they're actually in a good position to do it, but the executional difficulty of with punishing or otherwise beating this approach can end up too high for you to easily discern how to deal with it. It's important to not end up on tilt in these situations as well, even though it is one of the most frustrating things in fighting games. It's for this reason that it's extremely important to recognize when you are being defeated because your opponent is basically just attacking wherever you are and you happen to try to play footsies or something. As you get meaningfully better at the game, there's a drastic reduction in the amount of times this works on you. And as it generally is an outright manifestation of a scramble or an aspect of, let's call it misinformation. Misunderstanding is not quite the right word, because you can use this consciously to mess with your opponent. It's a matter of receiving misinformation, whether or not your opponent intended to misinform you or not, and reacting in that way. On the other side, you have characters who specialize in misinformation. And as you have heard me say many times, I play this sort of team precisely because that's what they do. Forgot she cannot do that super in that position. So Piccolo has survived the Super Saiyan 4 Rising Dragon Punch. Yes, it is technically actually called that. But as Goku cannot maintain his Super Saiyan 4 form, we get back to Small and Squishy, who is more than a match for Frieza, but is not so good at opening up the Emperor of the Universe, as Frieza has too many methods to attack too many different parts of the screen. Misinformation, therefore, doesn't really phase characters like Frieza as much, because Frieza's not really trying to, so to speak, hit you. Frieza more so just fills space with attacks and assumes you're going to die.
It's all or nothing.
Invincible moves are generally a good anti-disinformation tool. So, honestly, if you play characters with good invincible moves, I strongly suggest that you don't put too much effort into stressing yourself out about these things. If you assume my opponent is really mashy and loves to attack no matter what, then that's what invincible moves are for, just use them. You will at the worst discourage them from doing it, which is exactly what you want for the most part. As it's very difficult to consistently bait someone into doing such things if you just don't do enough pressure to get hit by them as well. Those are usually more so of a timing thing. So the important thing is to make sure that they're a built-in part of your defense game and not something you do because you're on tilt. If you tend to defend by blocking your way through problems, keep doing that. And if you tend to defend by, at any point, wishing to just do an invincible move, you should aim to make that decision at least somewhat randomly. Don't wait until your opponent stresses you out, because that's the time they're most likely, at least, to guess, oh, you're going to do your invincible wake up now, so let me block it. You really want to keep them on their toes. Like, oh, will they or won't they? Especially if you have at least enough defensive awareness to recognize when your opponent hasn't taken certain actions and quickly do something. We see that sort of thing from Rabbit quite a lot. It's built into his character team as well. His reaction to opponent has not done a final attack and I did not uppercut is normally quick enough to get somewhere. Characters with long range and good sliding lows in this game are particularly good at this, as the thing that usually follows from there is the opponent being uncertain of themselves and wanting to get out of the situation, either through their up back, which often gets caught by things like stand heavy, or walking or backdashing away, which gets caught by 2M on quite a few characters. Therefore, it's perfectly fine to keep going for a while until you meet someone who can actually present true misinformation, i.e. to make you do things like uppercut when they're out of range, but it was done purposely. However, those things usually require a lot of layers, and sometimes they don't even work. Like, you might just decide, I'm going to do this or this thing or another thing anyway, and it works out perfectly fine. The key is to not get frustrated by the misinformation, whether that be by avoiding the situation as much as possible in the case of characters that tend to play very high on neutral, or just Y block when you can uppercut. As mentioned before, this stream is actually only going to be on for another half an hour or so. We're stopping a little early today due to the logistics from previous regarding the Monster Hunter World video, i.e. we didn't know how long it was going to last, so we didn't make plans around this as much, and that shifted a couple things.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess.
But let's start this match from the other side, and I'm perfectly fine with telegraphing to my opponent that's what's going to be happening. Frieza's much worse at standard defense when he has to deal with a lot of layers of it. It's partially why he's the anchor on the team in this case. You usually want to be rid of at least one of the opposing characters to lessen the number of assist stuff that Frieza has to deal with. The main reason for this is Frieza's attacks take relatively long. And while he has really good range of his own and can put himself in really good situations, the opponent can deal with a lot of this by not going near him. This is actually a fairly standard prospect for zoners in certain types of fighting games. If you are not able to get through their zoning, your better option is actually to get far away from it. And at max range, Frieza's medium ground blasts don't actually even hit. Therefore, there's a lot of things to be said for understanding and anticipating when your opponent thinks it's their turn. Or at least enough to try to get in. Piccolo is, of course, much better at dealing with this situation. Even if he's not the strongest of characters overall at it, he has all this stuff. And that, you see, is the reason. Because getting your opponent to think that you are trying to get in and then not bothering to finish doing it is one of the most effective ways in on a lot of zoners. This makes them flinch and feel a little less confident in doing the thing required to stop you from approaching. We are back to the situation of Kid Goku with no assists. And while Frieza's no longer around, these two are not that much easier to open up either. 18 is probably the easiest, as she doesn't have as many good options in the direct defense department. Nor is the actual addition of Piccolo's assist all that helpful to her in the process. Since one must generally recover down in order to get away from Piccolo's corner juggle, that is actually a reset. So if you're not familiar with it, when you land after your down tech, uppercut, more or less. Piccolo can counter you, but that's like the hardest of reads.
This should be a great fight.
So how does this apply to a frustration player like Rune Siren? Well, one of the most frustrating things you can do to an opponent in any game is counter everything. But in order to counter everything, especially with characters that don't have the fastest moves, you have to keep a lot of options in mind at once to see all of the potential directions your opponent could try to attack from. But more importantly, to learn to ignore certain ones simply because they're not damaging enough. Until your opponent has managed to get you opened up in some way that is really stressful, you can just ignore certain types of damage. That is a good example of something that can just be ignored. Mainly because after Boo does take damage from things like this, you can just switch immediately. There's no real reason why Boo must stay in. He would get to recover that blue health basically every time. The difficult part, of course, being that the switch itself has some stressors associated with it. But this isn't completely true either. At the beginning of the match, when all three characters are still available, a frustration player can use an assist to cover a swap. Or they can use the assist to cover no swap, as just seen. So in this fight, where we're often seeing situations where Omni-Rabbit's attacks while hitting are not necessarily giving him advantage, the situation can be pushed in that direction. There is some difficulty here in that the execution for this is hard. And understanding which of the characters you want to pull in often matters. But what you've seen demonstrated thus far is fairly good in terms of being the main option for it. Call Bardock and use that as something just long enough to make your opponent think about something else. And then decide if you want to switch or not. This is particularly helpful for players who have trouble staying still, who constantly want to be moving toward the opponent or trying to hit them even though they don't necessarily need to be in that moment. But in this team, you don't really see a lot of other uses of the assists. We know that they end up in scramble situations, and we know they end up in knockback situations. They're not the greatest for pressure, so there's no need to think about using them that way. This also helps increase the synergy of Vegeta, as he's going to be sometimes the character you bring in, preventing the situation we're seeing here that often comes up in our matches, where Vegeta is left with no assists to help him do his zoning. This is the sort of thing that goes into your strategy notes for yourself. we've said many times, understanding how and when to focus the use of your assists or character switches, if you have a team where the assists aren't really doing any work as assists, take up a huge chunk of the middle section of learning Dragon Ball FighterZ.
It's time to face your opponent.
Let's therefore look at the perspective from something called lockdown control. Lockdown control is only available to characters who have equally powerful air attacks as their super dash combos. So Piccolo is already disqualified. Piccolo has okay air attacks, but they're mostly for defense.
It's all or nothing. Fight it out.
Eighteen can do okay, but she has to do a lot of targeting for that, meaning that it still ends up being at least partially defense. You're free to play defense in this situation, but eventually, again, an opponent who mostly just attacks will get through, because their method of how to deal with this is just hit more buttons. So what you need in order to achieve this is Frieza. Does this hit? I think it does. Well, but does it kill? Yeah. An opponent who is spending a lot of time thinking about that sort of thing doesn't have time to focus on the super dash. And since Frieza can bob in the air and change his trajectory quite a lot in other ways, there's really no way to deal with it in that way. But there's those buttons. At this point, the fight is basically over. And we're just buying time for the sparking to run up. The opponent then ends up completely distracted from Frieza's normal fighting style, and the problem gets resolved because they can't hit him and they can't keep up with him. The lockdown does not work on defensive players as they don't care, they'll block through most of it, watch their assist meter, think about how they can best utilize certain tactics or techniques they have, and push through in some way based on specifically measuring distances. But heavy offense players don't often spend much time measuring distances. They're spending time measuring units of time. Do they have enough time to do this attack? Do they have enough space to do it and it land? But not necessarily are they in the right position to do it. They're expecting you to come to them, or they just don't care most of the time.
The battle's about to start. Good luck.
Another good method for all of this is to have a team with a bulletproof offense plan.
It's all or nothing.
This is different from having a difficult-to-punish executionally offense plan. A bulletproof offense plan means once you do get it started, a lot of damage is going to happen. It doesn't matter really how hard it is to get it started though, unless your opponent is massively better than you. Metacon style often approximates to this. Once Metacon has gotten a certain thing started, you can't really do too much about it, which can indeed itself put you on tilt. But the mental space that this helps with is understanding that you can afford to be calm all the rest of the time. Because eventually the opening will happen, eventually the strike will happen, eventually the incredible conversions of King Gohan and Videl will happen, and the damage will come. So you don't have to spend a lot of time worrying about how you're going to get in, your opponent's current plans, or any of those things. You just focus on playing your game and make sure you have characters with the output to make that a win condition. To counter this is twofold. Obviously, first you must attempt to do your absolute best to prevent yourself from getting into this position. But the second part is much harder. Don't respond until it's over. The reason that works is simple. If your opponent has a single strategy that hits really hard, their mind is often quite clear. They don't have to think about too much, except looking for that moment, looking for that opening to start the thing they're trying to do. If you block through a ton of it, what happens is that you eventually force the opponent to focus on a way to open you up. It also helps you stay more focused in terms of understanding where you are on the screen and those few moments where the person with the bulletproof plan, the gun jams, well, rather the other way around. They have some problem in spacing or timing that they were not expecting, which shifts things by just the tiniest bit. And if you're a decent defensive player, this will get you through a lot of situations. If you're a player who knows how to use your invincible moves, same options. But the important thing to recognize is that the thing your opponent is currently doing is mostly to maybe frustrate you, is to make you do something to give them the opening they need.
Time to begin the match.
Any style of play from the opponent can manage to put you on tilt, if you're the sort of person who's affected by it a lot. One example is the interaction between these two teams. Generally, Kid Buu can't open up this group. But I don't like standing still. which means you get a lot of situations where normally I'd get caught in Candy Beam. But my opponent isn't really using the Candy Beam because their intention is to win by Candy Beam. It's just because it's a thing they do, and they expect me to move forward eventually. Now, I'll still oblige because obviously we're not here to have that sort of match, although we can. But understanding your opponent really doesn't understand how to get in on you can change your own perspective of the match too. There's the Candy Beam. The important thing is to not take too much out of that. I know I could have stayed there and probably just sat through it because, again, Kid Buu can't actually do the opening up part of this. So my opponent spends a lot more energy to do the same things. But the curse of being unwilling to not play offense is that you will always lose these players who play in that form. For example, I get on tilt very easily. I get on tilt particularly by opponents that don't actually quote-unquote fight back. People who spend a lot of time waiting for me to go to them will generally manage to get this to happen because I just don't have the patience to play a fighting game for that purpose. But this is compounded by the fact that I play a lot of characters that are very good at making sure you can't get in, and therefore making it a very bad idea to try. Meaning that even if your intent was not to lure me in to make mistakes, trying to get in from your side would still be a bad idea. So optimal play would still result in the same sort of thing. It's also important, therefore, to recognize when you are on tilt because of something about the game that you want to do, but you do it too well and therefore have discouraged your opponent from ever interacting with that. It looks like the servers have decided that we are in fact stopping even before I thought we were. But maybe it's just a small glitch and we are actually in. Yes, we are. It gets a little weird sometimes.
Get ready for battle.
Still, it seems to have ejected Kid Goku. Well, no, not Kid Goku anymore. But ejected Notakon and team from this. Making our last match of the night a familiar one. Tenacity. But again, this is partially because of the difficulty in managing to, starting from Ollie Rabbit's team, get this sort of setup going. And that is a lot of meter to have to worry about. You deflect, and Bardock is a particularly strong character after deflects.
これ以上好きにさせんぞ。お前はもう終わりだ。完全に切り裂いてしまえ。
But, like I said, invincible moves, mashiness, in this case even better, this command grab, and we have a Vegeta with no assists. Bringing us to the end of our stream. There will be no stream tomorrow. Most likely we have no bot to release and no specific content. You might be able to catch us at 2_MK_FGC on Twitter, and if we announce a DOA stream, perhaps that will happen, but don't expect anything. Therefore, our next content will be next Monday's Mishmashing Battle Lounge for Street Fighter V. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.